Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Today, I am joined by Tanis Jorge, who is the founder of the Co-Founders Hub, former co-founder / COO of Twilio, and the co-founder, COO of multiple startups, fellow Vancouverite. Tanis, how are you today?
I'm great, Anthony. How are you?
Oh, I'm so excited. And everybody watching at home and you're looking outside and you're seeing how beautiful it is in the background. No, it's not Vancouver today, but that's okay. But Tanis has done a lot of cool things in the startup world, built an amazing company, is working on another cool project. I'm just so personally and professionally excited to talk to you. Tanis, why don't you tell our listeners more about you, what brought you to today, and then I'll get into some questions.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Anthony. So origin story. I started multiple tech companies in the data-driven businesses, mostly in the identity space. My first company I started right outside of high school with my best friend in high school, Stephen Efford. And we started about a year or so after we graduated and found ourselves in a really, really unique market, very niche. And it was something that was able to take us through over a decade while we built three tech companies, each of them that we were able to successfully build and exit. And then after that decade, we kind of shook hands and said, well, that was a fun ride. That's it. It's over. And then basically Steve said, you know what, I'm going to head to Silicon Valley. We got this idea. I want to do some R&D on it. Do you want to go on this ride too? And I said, sure. But I got 2 kids under 2 at that point. And I said, you go on ahead and I'll manage things from Vancouver and you head down. And that's what he did. So he did R&D. We raised money down in the Valley, brought that money up to Vancouver, and the rest is basically history. Raised all of our rounds actually based and headquartered out of Vancouver. So very proud to be able to marry both geographical areas. A lot of times Vancouver thinks they're Silicon Valley North, and we were able to really marry those two together. So it was awesome.
Yeah. That's excellent. And then what are you doing now with the Co-Founders Hub?
Yeah. So after I sort of stepped out of the day-to-day at Twilio, I was looking at what can I offer next? And I would get asked to advise a lot of co-founders who were struggling in their partnerships. And they said, man, you've built 4 companies with the same co-founder. How have you done it? And you haven't killed each other yet. That was really the premise of it. And so I realized that there really was a shortage of resources and tools for people who were at the helm of their companies. And I realized that I had some really interesting insights. And then once I interviewed hundreds of other co-founders, I was able to kind of bring all that together. And I wrote the book, the Co-Founders Handbook. And now the Co-Founders Hub is an online resource for co-founders to get tools and support to grow their businesses through stronger partnerships.
Sweet. I love it. Well, I will definitely ask you about that. By the way, if you haven't looked up Twilio, it's an amazing company and all of the other companies that I'm sure you brought in there. But I want to ask, we'll speak to the COO side of things, because I do know that there's a lot of COOs who sometimes want to kill their CEOs, and we're about we don't need succession planning at this point. Obviously it was very helpful. I assert it was helpful that you had somebody that you knew and you trusted, that you guys understand how you worked together to create that partnership. I also assert that you probably had complementary skills, the visionary versus the operator, that kind of thing. But for you specifically, how did you guide yourself, or how did you continue to be a successful COO? What made you a great COO is really my question.
Yeah, startups are such a unique atmosphere because you really have to wear so many hats. And I think anyone who started a company, they recognize that the term when an early startup person says janitor as their role, or COO and janitor, or whatever it is, that's such a reality. And so for us, by the time that we moved into Twilio, I think we had really mastered the ability to wear different hats. and to be malleable and such. So I think when it came to our roles, we had already had experience in 3 other companies of what we did well. And for Steven, he's amazing at really just taking the vision and being that mouthpiece to communicate it from a very simplified level. And I was able to be there as that support. I call it support, even though we both had, vital roles, but to be able to come in and go, I know what I know what you need while you're out there fundraising, while you're out there, spreading the word. I can be here kind of holding down the fort and really just helping to run what's going on while he was out there, doing CEO type roles, which is a little different as a startup founder, I think, than sometimes when you're scaling a company.
Absolutely. Because the companies you work with, they were not tiny. Like, yes, you might have started off as the janitor, so to speak, but you had some size behind you. So it's more than doing all of those little roles, but it's managing all of that and supporting that growth and scale, if I understand.
Absolutely. And it's interesting as the COO of a company, especially starting off as an early startup phase, your role slowly, I think, alters a lot more than, say, the CEO role. So when you're starting off early, you kind of have all these jobs. You're in marketing, you're assisting with the finance, you're doing all these sort of supplemental roles. And as you grow and scale, you're able to slowly pick apart, I think, more of the COO's position gets picked apart a little bit more. And that gets sort of distributed out of your role. So there got to a point after about the 3rd or 4th year that I was able to technically kind of look at what it is that I actually enjoy in starting a business. Before, you don't have that glory or that benefit of being able to choose what you want to do. You got to do it all. But there was a point in the role of Truly You that I was able to say, hey, let's branch off some of these operations type to people who really have a strong skill set in that way. And I love marketing. So I kind of glassed onto marketing a little bit more, even though my role was still COO. We were able to, distribute those tasks in some ways to people who were really strong.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I see a lot of CEOs of large businesses that they don't have some, whether it's like a 30-person company or a 300-person company, where they haven't put that COO in place. But it's interesting to show that the COO can take off progressively or unpeel the task of a CEO. It's critical to understand their needs, and then you kind of backfill them so the CEO can do what they do well. I do find that CEOs without a COO, there's usually an area that pulls them back. Like they get held back because they might have an individual role, but if they don't have somebody like with their back at all times, then that is their glaring weakness. Did you find that was the case and you were able to like dance well together in that?
Yeah, definitely. I think, one of the things that even in because you can use it even in a organization, if you have, even if they're not co-founders necessarily, you still have this, synergy that has to occur. And of course, we're all not great at everything. That's just standard. But I think it's really important that those key people at the top, at the helm, are able to really identify their strengths and be able to share it with those people, and so that you can distribute those roles easily. And that was what I think Steven and I did really well. And that's what we talked to people about, is that we were able to really determine what was his strengths, what were mine, and there was no ego. And we just stepped off where each other left off. And that was really, I think, a key role, and key importance.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, congratulations on all that stuff, because that's really cool. So let's switch gears a little bit, talking about co-founder life, because co-founders are typically, you see them more in tech. And in my experience, partners, not co-founders per se, are often the bane of a startup entrepreneur's existence or small business existence. So what is the key to a good co-founder relationship as one is starting up a business? And then, how does that become more important as the business matures. When you have nobody working for you, then it's just you 2 or 3 in a bunker. But if you get to 100 or 200 people, how does that co-founder relationship need to evolve?
I love that you, side note, I love that you captured co-founder versus business partner. And in a way, I think that's tomato, but you're absolutely right. Co-founder is really the term typically used in the tech industry, but really this is across the board for all business partners. There's really no difference. I interviewed co-founders in construction to music bands, like, you know, where you kind of have the lead singers like the CEO. And so you have these, you know, this is across all business partners. So, you know, 65% of businesses are going to fail because of issues between the founders. And that's a massive amount. That was one of the things that really triggered me to go, I had no idea. And so one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of is trying to teach intentionality to people, no matter what stage they're in when it comes to their partnership. So if you are looking for a co-founder, you need to be incredibly intentional about who that person is, because you are literally putting your financial future in their hands. And if you do that with the wrong person, you're really going to be in trouble. And then if you're in a partnership already, same thing. You got to get intentional. This isn't a set it and forget it kind of relationship. This is something we're on a daily, weekly, monthly, annually basis. Really need to be intentional, because as strife happens or stresses in your business or things that happen, and they always do, as that happens, you really run a risk of jeopardizing your business. And so I really try and help people to see the correlation between a strong partnership and a strong business. And so intentionality is like a huge word when it comes to co-founder partnerships.
So we do strategic planning. We facilitate strategic planning offsites for leaders, their executive teams. What was the processes or systems that you put in place to maintain that alignment on that daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis? Was it relatively easy? I mean, like all relationships, you need to work at it. What are the 2 or 3 things that you did that cemented your success in your relationship?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think Stephen and I did really well, and was a unintentional reason for our success, and that was our communication was very good. We talked about issues before they happened. Partly maybe because we knew each other and we just had a history, but we also talked about, hey, is this going to be a problem down the road? And we would whiteboard even our vision for the company. We'd whiteboard almost like a choose your own adventure. Here's all the possible scenarios, and here's where they could all go. And we would talk about these potential issues as we grew the company. And so we really talked about the things that could potentially jeopardize our partnership and jeopardize our business. And we were very honest, very authentic with one another. And there really was nothing that couldn't be talked about. And so, I mean, that is key. We actually we created the discovery session at the hub, and that is like 120 questions of things you got to talk about before it becomes an actual issue. Like questions like, should we let our kids work in the business? Like that's a huge one. The amount of people I talked to who said that their partner brought their spouse in halfway through the business, and all of a sudden it's like, how do you say, no, I don't want your spouse working at the company? That gets very charged, especially in the moment that they want to bring them in. So if you can talk about these topics ahead of time without the emotional charge behind it, it becomes very valuable. So again, it's having these hard conversations.
So basically what I heard in it before you actually explain it. So you guys basically have to go to premarital counseling before you get into your partnership, because you're going to be stuck with each other for a long time, and better do all of that stuff on the front end than on the back end.
Assume success. Assume your company's around for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And you got to navigate that path with the same person. And you're going to go through all these different life stages. And again, some of these things that come in, are better talked about before their issues. Divorce, illness, death, heaven forbid. People who go through phases where their financial situation changes, and all of a sudden they're like, I need money. I need more money than I did. And maybe it's for a short term, but how are you going to handle that? How do you help each other out? These are like really, really intense questions that oftentimes, I think, especially in the early stages, it's a bit of a wet blanket exercise where we're ripe with excitement. We're the next Facebook, we're heading out there. We're going to, knock this out of the park. The last thing you want to do is say, well, what happens if one of us is caught stealing, or one of us is writing bad checks? Like, nobody wants to talk about that. But yeah, it's preparation is hindsight's 2020, but at the same time, dig your well before you're thirsty.
I love it. Oh, and communication being critical, like not be afraid to talk about it. The one thing I see as an advisor is where you have a partnership, not necessarily co-founder, but call it partnership, but yes, same, but different.
Yeah.
And the company has become successful on the back of one person, for lack of better word. Somebody does 90% of the work, somebody does 10% of the work, and it's super uncomfortable because you don't want to talk about it. And then maybe that 10% is very, very, very valuable, but it's still only seen as 10% versus 90. And then it gets messy, and then you get a divorce, and then it causes problems. In your research, what did you see? How have people dealt with it? How have they not dealt with it to their own demise?
Yeah, you know what? That's a massive one. That's a huge one where you have this unbalanced workload, unbalanced work ethic. And it's one of those things, it's a little bit tricky to know ahead of time, especially if you've never worked before, maybe don't know each other very long. So one of the keys that I talk about, if we look at stages, so let's say somebody's getting ready to start working with somebody, they haven't signed on the dotted line of their partnership agreement yet, but they're looking at it. One of the things that is key is, for me, is to really examine expectations. Oftentimes people go, I presumed, like, if I had $1 for every time someone who was struggling said, I presumed, it's like, no, I don't presume. Like, you really have to, you have to talk about it. You have to ask these questions. What is going to be the time commitment? In the new world now, are we coming into the office? Are you going to work from home? Who's going to open the doors at 9 and clock out at 5? These are these questions that early on you can hopefully figure out where each other is at, and either decide how you're going to work it or handle it in some sort of way. If you're in a partnership, then again, same sort of scenario, kind of going back to, when we started this, we were going to be 50-50 on time. Gee, Jerry, you know what? Now, admittedly, you're working less than I am, and that's okay. Maybe we need to have this reflected in our equity. Maybe we need to do something a little different, or honestly, I'm overwhelmed right now, and I need you to take some more off my plate. And oftentimes we maybe presume that's going to be a hard conversation, and the other person goes, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, let's see, especially if they find out it's really hard. So again, it keeps coming back to communication, and really just being honest.
Yeah. And I will say, from my experience, resentments only grow. Absolutely. And so if you don't deal with the thing right away, it'll become a problem. And I actually just interviewed somebody else about communication, and eventually it comes out. So pay now, pay later. Eventually you're going to pay. So might as well get the awkwardness out of the way. Otherwise, it's your business. You're potentially talking, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars for your unwillingness to deal with uncomfortable things. So, and the legacy for your kids.
It's true. And there is a space for putting things under the rug. And this is where I talk a little bit about maturity. This is where I talk to people about being able to really look at something and say, is this the hill I'm going to die on? Is this really, really important? And I think a lot of times when we look at these issues, we really can recognize that maybe it isn't necessarily such a big idea or a big problem. And so we also can throw things under the rug in a mature way and say, you know what, this is not a big deal. We're on the same team. I know they're not twisting their mustaches, figuring out how they can screw me, right? I know they're on my team. And so this necessarily, I'm just going to let this go. And it's not a big deal. Again, if it happens again, and this seems repetitive, then yeah, you need to address it. But I think sometimes too, we need to depersonalize the relationship. And if I can expand on that a little bit, a lot of times we mention that partnerships are like a marriage. And I would say yes, in some ways, but in one way, they should be very different. And that is that in a marriage, you really are focused on each other's well-being. But as business partners, you want to care about each other's well-being, but the priority is the business. And I think if you do that and you say everything we do is a filter through that lens, and we're really good, what is the best for the business? You can depersonalize it. And you can say, maybe the best for the business is not to have your son, step into this role. It might be better that we find somebody who's that. And then that person can go, oh yeah, that's true. Whereas otherwise they're looking at them saying, you just don't like my son. So that is the difference between looking at a partnership as like a marriage, for what it really is sort of, there's that third entity in the group, or a fourth, it depends on how many co-founders, but really having to make that business the central figure.
I was thinking about it like a baby. You're a baby.
It's a baby. You got to take care of the baby.
But it's interesting that you mentioned that, because the one thing that I was like, hey, what would cause the most stress, that makes the most uncomfortable, is that spouse family conversation. And what doesn't go away is when you start a business with your family. And that will be a whole other conversation that will park.
It's actually the next book. The next book is literally, how do you do, because I couldn't add it. It is so otherworldly that you can't meld the two. Family is a whole other.
Yeah, because you still have to see them on Sunday for dinner. So we'll have you back once that book is written to talk about family, because it is dicey. It's so complicated, and there's a lot of, the thing that I think is different is the guilt. There's guilt wrapped in it, and like that's an X factor. If you understand it, it's a little bit okay because you can't separate it. But when you're in it, you're in it. So okay, Tanis, like I told you, we probably could chat for hours and hours and hours and hours. What is, as we finish up today, what is the one piece of what did you learn in your career as a COO where you totally got your butt handed to you, and maybe you got like really humbled by something that you learned, and you say, whoa, I will either never do that again, or just a really formative learning experience as you're in your growth as a leader? If you can think of one, where I'm sure that there were maybe at least a couple. Anything that come to mind where you got your butt kicked and you learned something?
Yeah, I think really seeing as your company grows and scales, how you do things on a small level doesn't always translate later. And as you bring in experts, and as you bring in hopefully really, really incredible talent, sometimes we found that there was a point in the size of the company that we actually didn't know better always. And you really had to lean in. And as entrepreneurs who before had smaller businesses and had never really taken them to scale, to no longer really be the expert in your business is very humbling when you realize that. And you have to go, oh my goodness, actually, I think I might need to really hand this off to you and your expertise. And it is about really handing your baby over to somebody and saying, okay, I'm going to give you this piece. You can babysit for a while and take it, and I'm going to trust you with it. And realizing that you have to be humble, and that maybe your decisions in a particular field aren't the most knowledge-based, and you have to lean in on theirs. And I think that was something that we eventually had to learn as we grew our team to more and more incredible talent that were brought on board as more experts in their field. We really had to humble ourselves in that way and go, okay, we're going to trust, and we're going to lean in on that and give them the reins. So that would be definitely one.
Sweet. I love that. And you had so many successes, so it's really cool. Important reflection that there's always opportunity to grow as a leader and always opportunity to grow in partnership with co-founders or otherwise. Taniss, where can people pick up your book? Where can they learn more about you? Where can they connect? Where can they make friends?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazon and all the other platforms. You can get the book in Kindle and ebook and audiobook and paperback March 2nd. And then at the Co-Founders Hub, you can check that out. It'll launch March 2nd as well. And all the resources there for people to really strengthen that partnership no matter what stage they're in.
Excellent. As someone who's seen a lot of businesses, if you are getting in for lack of a better word, getting in bed with somebody in terms of business, I encourage you to don't do that unless you're really in business together. But do it on the front end to save you problems on the back end. We'll edit that part out. No, probably not. But anyways, Tanis, thank you so much for being here. It was such a personal and professional pleasure. And I know it'll make a big difference for all the current and future co-founders out there. So thanks for being with us on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, Anthony.
Folks, my guest today, Tanis Jorge, who is the founder of the Co-Founders Hub, former COO of Twilio, as well as a bunch of other startups. Folks, one thing to never take for granted is how much work goes into a relationship, whether that's a relationship with your employees, whether that's a relationship with your spouse, or the relationship with your co-founder that's going to take your organization to new heights. So put the work in, have those conversations early and often to save yourself trouble and challenges down the road. So once again, this has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My name is Anthony Taylor. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.